Thanks for coming out this morning to Fordham's Ohio Education Speakers Series. My name is Chad Aldis, the Vice President for Ohio Policy and Advocacy at the Thomas B. Fordham Institute. I did say series, so those of you who have been here before for one of our events, thank you for coming back. We're glad we didn't scare you away. Those who are there for the first time, welcome. We're really glad to have you. We are trying to do these on about a monthly basis. Future topics we're thinking about including in these include school closures, perhaps deregulation, which has been a big topic of late in the legislature, open enrollment, and the academic achievement of voucher students, specifically the Ed Choice program. We have a study coming out probably in the next couple of months that should shine some light on that as well. So we look forward to you joining us on those times. Hopefully that's just enough to get you to that, and a warm breakfast will get you to come back again. So today's topic is teacher evaluations, and we're excited about today's panel, which includes immediately on my right, Matt Verber, the State Policy Director for StudentsFirst. StudentsFirst has probably been the leading advocacy group nationally for annual teacher evaluations. And Melissa Cropper, the President of the Ohio Federation of Teachers. OFT is, of course, the second largest teachers union in Ohio and a critical voice in just about all education discussions here in the state. For me personally, this is an exciting discussion. Teacher evaluations are a tough issue for me. I understand the reasons and arguments for them, but I also look at the application and the implementation and how they work out and the results some other states have gotten, and I just find myself in the middle. I think they're important, but are we doing it right? Are they working? All of those things. So I'm sort of, maybe by the end of today's discussion, I'll know exactly where I am, but right now, let's get the discussion started. So I'm going to ask a question of them to sort of get it going. I've got a few questions here. After about 20 or 30 minutes, depending on if they run out of my questions, we'll go ahead and open it up to questions from the audience as well. So the first one is policymakers in Ohio and around the country, but let's limit it to Ohio, have spent a lot of time arguing, debating the merits about teacher evaluations. How important are they?
Okay. Teacher evaluations are critically important. We know that teacher quality is the #1 in-school factor affecting student achievement. And to be able to ensure that every child, every classroom has an effective teacher, we need to have quality teacher evaluations. Really, the whole point of teacher evaluations is to provide quality professional development, to help teachers improve their instruction, to provide teachers with the feedback they need to improve their own instruction, to allow administrators to provide the supports and intervention for teachers so they can improve their instruction. So I know that sometimes in the conversation and in the implementation of teacher evaluations, sometimes the whole point gets lost, the fact that you need quality professional development at the end of the process. And you mentioned that some places you see it successful, sometimes not, where they implement new teacher evaluations. And I think where we see districts and states have effective teacher evaluations, and by that I mean new evaluation systems actually improve student achievement, improve teacher quality, we see that they have really comprehensive professional development programs in place. So I think that's a critical piece of the puzzle that unfortunately sometimes is missing. And you can't really have teacher buy-in into the teacher evaluation process if they don't see that at the end of the day there's that professional development available to them, and that makes the whole process worthwhile.
So hold on just a second. Could you guys hear Matt well enough?
Oh,
you
sorry,
might want to slide your microphone a little bit closer
Thank
to you.
you,
Okay,
sorry.
great.
Great.
Go ahead, Melissa.
So there's nothing that Matt said, if I was listening closely enough, that I necessarily disagree with. As Matt pointed out, teacher quality is considered the #1 in-school factor for quality in education. But I want to point out that oftentimes we leave out that term in-school factor, and we make it sound like teacher quality is the only factor, and that's where some of the controversy comes in, and we overlook some of the other overarching issues that impact education, such as poverty and other school factors. But teacher quality is, of course, a very important factor. And as Matt said, the important piece is here the teacher development part. So when you look at teacher evaluation systems, you can look at a system of development, or you can look at it as a system of measurement. Or in a perfect world, you would have a little bit of a combination of both. But teachers see the evaluation system, and why the Ohio Federation of Teachers supported the original concept of OTES was because we saw it as a system for developing the profession, developing teachers as they go through the profession, and as a tool for helping teachers set goals for improvement, as a tool for guiding their next steps up the professional ladder, and as a tool to help them grow as a teacher. And unfortunately, I think where we've gotten offline is that we've kind of lost that development piece, and we're focusing too much on the measurement piece. So I'll just leave that to your question.
So I think, Matt, in your comments, you mentioned teacher evaluations and kind of contrasting a little bit of the new teacher evaluations with old ones. So, you know, the general public has to be thinking, haven't we always done teacher evaluations? So why are these teacher evaluations, I guess, different? What is it they do? And why should it be a statewide system instead of just maybe a requirement in law saying school districts have a teacher evaluation system?
So contrasting the new systems with most of the old systems had just binary ratings. It was unsatisfactory, satisfactory, and usually they didn't rely on multiple measures of effectiveness. They just primarily relied on classroom observations, and they weren't very comprehensive evaluations done by principals in terms of kind of like compliance manner in a lot of ways. They weren't seen as a priority in terms of the principal's responsibility. So at the end of the day, they didn't provide teachers with the feedback that they needed to really improve their instruction, didn't provide administration with the information and data that they needed to provide the professional development necessary to ensure that every classroom had an effective teacher, they were able to develop their teachers. So really, the rating system wasn't really effective, didn't provide much differentiation, and there was just a lack of information that came out of the evaluations.
Okay. Melissa, anything to add on that one?
Well, I would agree that it was too binary in the past, and that we needed a system that actually, as I said before, helped that teacher development piece and helped lead towards the right professional development, help direct teachers to what their next steps were. I'm not sure that I agree that we need a statewide system. I think we need a statewide framework that gives guidelines for what a quality evaluation would look like. But part of the problem is, again, we put these ideal systems, we mandate these ideal systems, but then we fail to give the funding and the support that we need to make sure these systems are successful. So if we really wanted OTES to work, we really wanted a system that focused on teacher development, then we would ensure that we have evaluators, credentialed evaluators who can help provide that correct professional development. We can make sure that our principals or teacher leaders can be used as instructional leaders in the school. And we would make sure that the management type pieces that are involved in running a school are taken care of in another way, and that we have enough people in the school to be able to really drive a quality evaluation system. And personally, I think that we would, or our organization would believe that we would invest more in teacher coaching and find more ways for teachers to be able to use their expertise to help grow the profession and to help in that evaluation process and to make it more of a mentoring process. But again, what we have done in Ohio is drop this system in place, but not provide the resources that we need to really make sure that it's successul.
Boy, you guys are just going to get along on everything. Let's see if I can mix it up a little bit.
Can I just follow up on that?
Please.
So I agree with a lot of what Melissa said. I think it's a shame that a lot of times when districts are implementing these new systems, frankly, the administrators just don't have the capacity to do really comprehensive observations, to be able to sit down with the educators following the observations and to provide in-depth feedback, to listen to the teacher and to follow up and say, all right, were you able to implement some of the ideas that we had following our observation? Also the idea of having really effective educators go back and observe other teachers and to provide their expertise and say, I noticed that when a student asked this question, you answered in this way. Have you thought about really engaging them and asking follow-up questions and doing this and that? I found that effective in my classroom when I taught the same subject. So one district I know that does that is Montgomery County in Maryland. So they have a system where an effective teacher then can apply to become a master educator or I think that's the title, it might not be the title. But basically that teacher then goes outside the classroom for a certain amount of time and observes other teachers and provides very in-depth feedback and mentoring to those teachers, and then has to go then back to the classroom after a certain number of years doing the observation side, so that they're still seen as teachers rather than administrators, because I know that sometimes can be an issue with teachers. It's like, well, you haven't been in the classroom for 10 years, so how can you tell me what it's like to teach? So the system is very set up so that it's constantly teachers evaluating other teachers. So that master educator is evaluating for a few years, but then goes back to the classroom. So you constantly have that experience in the classroom, so that when you go out to observe other teachers, you can relate to that teacher very well.
But I'll add to that, Chad, that a system like that requires funding. And as long as we have a system that's based on residual funding, we're having to look at how we cut teachers instead of how we put more educators in the building to drive a system like this, then we're not going to be successful with teacher evaluations. So at some point in time, we have to decide, Ohio has to decide that we want a high-quality education system, and funding is going to be a priority, and that we're going to provide funding for pieces like this and really spell out what it takes to have a high-quality education system and where we're going to put our resources to make that happen.
Okay. All right. Now for my somewhat more controversial question. I almost got you guys to disagree on some things there, so that's good. If you listen to the debate around the State House last year, it was centered around percentages of teacher evaluations that should be based on objective measures. And we were going back and forth between 50 to 35 to 42.5, which sounds also precise. So talk to me about your view of the role of objective measures in teacher evaluations. How important are they? We certainly spent a lot of time debating them.
I'll let you start.
Well, let me start by saying to land at 42.5% just shows that we haven't put any serious thought, or legislators haven't put serious thought into what it takes to drive this system. There's no research base behind 42.5%. It's simply a compromise between 35 and 50. And again, if we're making policy based upon compromises because people disagree, then we're not really looking at how we make the system work. I would argue that as long as we are putting a high emphasis on high-stakes tests, then we're impeding upon the practice that happens in the classroom. We're driving the systems toward compliance on a test, and we're changing the whole nature of education. So when teachers are concerned that their evaluation is going to be impacted by test results, when districts are concerned about being rated based upon test results, and other factors are ignored or aren't given as much weight, then again, we're driving the system to teach towards a test. So there do need to be some objective measures in there. I mean, I think there is some value to annual tests. I mean, it is important that we know where our students stand and where our subgroups stand, and make sure that we're reaching all those subgroups. The important question is, what do we do with the results of those tests? Do we use the results of those tests to then look at the system as a whole and say, well, maybe we need smaller class sizes, maybe we need more interventions at certain grades, use the test results to drive those decisions, or are we just using the test results to blame and shame? And that's what we have to ask ourselves.
So I'd agree with Melissa. I've never read a policy study that said 42.5% is the ideal percentage for an evaluation. I do think it's important, though, to have an objective measure within a teacher evaluation. We know that teaching is an incredibly difficult job. It requires a lot of different skill sets to be effective. And to have a good teacher evaluation, you need to include multiple measures. And I think one of those measures should reflect the primary responsibility of a teacher, which is to improve student achievement. So we should show in that evaluation how they're able to improve student achievement. Again, I think it's unfortunate that within that conversation, the focus was on an argument over one of the measures within the evaluation rather than what's the whole point of this evaluation and are we accomplishing that objective? Because I think that kind of is what upsets a lot of people within the system. Like, why are you doing this whole evaluation and taking up all this time and resource when at the end of the day I'm not getting the development that I need to become a better teacher? So again, I think the focus should be on, are we achieving the objective rather than what percentage should be in the evaluation, because 42.5 is not, an ideal percentage.
And I don't think we have found what educators trust as a reliable mechanism for determining that student growth at this point in time either. There are all kinds of studies that show that value added is not a reliable measure. There are problems with that system. We now have, our state is looking at throwing out student learning objectives, which actually are directly related to a classroom, and replacing that with shared attribution, which has a potential of a teacher's evaluation being based upon students that they never even taught. So again, we're kind of trying to find quick fix, easy answers to tough questions, and we're going to err on the side of doing a 42.5% instead of really looking at what is a quality student growth measure, and if there are problems with something like SLOs, how do we still look at what we're trying to accomplish and put in the professional development, the resources, the parameters that we need to make a system like that work, rather than looking for some quick fix that we could throw across the whole system.
Yeah, definitely, like, if we're saying that teacher quality is the #1 in-school factor affecting student achievement, and that we need effective teacher evaluations, we should definitely have a very comprehensive conversation about this topic, rather than the quick fixes that Melissa was mentioning. And we know that every measure within an evaluation is imperfect to a certain degree, and every measure has trade-offs. So classroom observations, we know from decades of research, are not the perfect measure for teacher evaluations. We don't want 100% of an evaluation based on classroom observations. And value-added measures are not perfect measures. We know that there are issues with value-added measures. However, they're a statistical model that we can test and improve over time. So the solution isn't to totally get rid of value-added measures, but to improve how they're calculated, to include them in teacher evaluations. And I know with any new test, there's going to be some uneasiness about including those test scores in the evaluations, and I think that's totally understandable. And with the SLOs and the shared attribution, we share some concern about including the shared attribution in the evaluation, because if we go back to what is the point of this evaluation, I don't know that looking at shared attribution for students that the teacher didn't teach really helps an evaluator and administrator look at how that individual teacher is doing and provide the development that teacher needs to improve her instruction. So for the SLOs, for example, so I just said every measure is imperfect. If there are some issues with SLOs, which I think we can all agree there are some issues with the way SLOs are done currently in Ohio, how can we improve the way that we're using SLOs? What do other states do, or other districts in other states do that are more effective ways of SLOs? And I think every teacher uses student learning objectives when they teach. They just don't call them SLOs. So it could be a very informal, form of SLO where the kids walk in the first day and you start, asking them questions. It's a Spanish class and you start asking them questions in Spanish. And it's like, whoa, they don't know any past tense. So we're going to back up a few steps and start with, the past tense. So, for decades, forever, teachers have been using SLOs. So whether we call it SLOs or not, teachers are using student learning objectives. So rather than creating an additional layer of testing, how are teachers naturally using SLOs? How can we look at SLOs to effectively evaluate teachers rather than just get rid of that and use a measure that might not be helpful to administrators and teachers in improving teacher instruction?
And along those lines, I would add too that really, again, the important piece in this evaluation is that teacher performance side, and more weight needs to be given to that teacher performance side. So even with using the SLOs, the results of that test at the end, the SLO test at the end, should count as part of a teacher's evaluation to some degree. But the bigger part of the evaluation should be, what was the teacher doing in the classroom during the course of the year? What mentorship were they being given along the way to help them improve that practice? What conversations can they have with their colleagues about what's happening in the classroom, what's happening around these SLOs? How are you using the information you're getting from formative assessments along the way to help improve your instruction? Those are all the really important parts of teaching that we're kind of losing focus on because we're so focused on these end results of the test. So if you look at a system like Toledo that has a very good peer assistance and review program, they put the emphasis, a lot of emphasis on this teacher performance piece, having the coaching there during the course of the year, having conversations with teachers during the course of the year, and then having an independent group of teachers and administrators looking at the progress that a teacher is making, and then making decisions about should this teacher be canceled out of the profession, or has this teacher grown and we need to keep this person in the system. And I think if we could develop more systems like that, where we're putting a lot of emphasis on what's actually happening in the classroom and trying to improve what's happening in the classroom rather than just putting so much emphasis on the outcomes at the end, we'll see those end results grow over the course of the time, but we have to put the emphasis on the teacher performance piece.
Yeah, and I think there definitely can be additional measures within the evaluation that help accomplish that. So right now I know that there's an alternative framework available for teacher evaluations, and I don't know if any districts have opted for that. But right now, within that alternative framework, you can choose one of several different options to including peer reviews, self-evaluations, student surveys. And I think to give districts the option to use multiple measures from that list would be great, and to also to kind of come up with their own measure if they wished, and have it approved by the Department of Education to use. So, you know, within the school year, you could have some of your colleagues who teach the same subject, same grade level, come in and observe your class and give you feedback throughout the year, and to do the same for your colleagues, to have students give you feedback as to how you're doing. I had a few teachers do that when I was in school, and I think it was helpful to the teacher, but I also felt it was really valuable to me as a student, because it told me that my feedback was important and that I was also a really important part of this process. It wasn't just the teacher lecturing me. I knew that for this to be effective, this whole classroom environment, it had to be an engagement between the teacher and the student. So I really appreciated when my teachers did that when I was in high school, and of course in college, in graduate school, professors almost always do that. So I think that's an important part if the survey is done well and asks the right questions, and plays a limited part in the evaluation.
But I would add to that any tool can be good or bad depending upon the conversation around it and the intent that's given to it. So, for example, a student survey, if it's being used to help inform the teacher about what's going on in the classroom and how they can change their instruction based upon the information that they get back, and how they how they use that to guide them, if that is the thrust of that student survey, then that can be a good tool. If that tool, however, is just used to give some kind of summative assessment at the end of this teacher is either good or bad based upon what the student said, then that leads to people gaming the system or being more concerned about the results of that survey, what their rating is going to be, rather than how they use this tool to help them. And that's the same issue with testing. When we use testing as a tool for punishment, then it changes the nature of what happens in the classroom. But when we use testing as formative assessments along the way to help guide instruction, then they can help us in what we're doing. So I think the conversations need to change. We are focusing so much on a system of trying to find bad teachers so we can get rid of them, instead of focusing on a system that supports educators and tries to help them grow, that we are driving people out of the profession. So we need a system that focuses on making sure that teachers get the right resources, and not just teachers, all educators get the right resources. Teachers, principals, superintendents, we all have the right resources to do what we need to do, and a system that supports us in that growth process, rather than just coming up with some kind of summative system that feels like it's designed to punish people.
All right. So I'm going to jump in now.
Okay.
Great discussion. Thank you very much. I think you both have kind of gotten together and talked about the importance, the overall overview of teacher evaluations and trying to make teachers more effective, trying to make sure the classroom works better, not being a shame and blame or something.
Yes.
Yeah. It's not a phrase I've used, but then you have situations like in California where you had the Vergara lawsuit, where essentially they went to court and said, look, these personnel policies that are in place are preventing schools, or making it very, very difficult for schools to exit bad teachers. The ones that, for whatever reason, the evaluation system in place there wasn't really identifying for either professional development purposes, apparently, or for exiting ineffective teachers. So what about the role of exiting ineffective teachers? Is it just going to happen without, is it already happening without this teacher evaluation system? Or is it necessary in order to get to a place where we make sure great teachers can be rewarded and continue making a difference in kids' lives, and bad teachers can, as I think as you said, Melissa, be counseled out if necessary?
Well, I pointed to what I believe is a quality system in Toledo, a system that focuses on giving teachers the supports they need from the time they enter the school system to make sure that they're able to grow, or, like I said, if for some reason they're not showing growth and it looks like they're someone who shouldn't be a teacher, then they're counseled out. And this is done very, very early, so you don't have those teachers around for a long time. We could have a long discussion about Vergara and what its purposes were and what its stated purposes were and what I believe its real purposes were. But let's not confuse Ohio with California either. I mean, you have to have 7 years under your belt in Ohio before you get a continuing contract. And if administrators haven't done their job in the 7 years in identifying who the poor teachers are that need to get out of the system, then I think they need to look at themselves and whether they have the proper professional development. They need to be able to evaluate teachers or not evaluate teachers. So I don't think that we need a statewide evaluation system to determine whether teachers are doing a good job or not doing a good job. What we need is properly trained people who have the ability to go into classrooms and know what they're looking for in a high-quality teacher, and to be able to help mentor, coach those people, whether that's principals doing that, colleagues who are doing that. We need some kind of system that's supporting teachers all along the way, and then, like I said, counseling out the ones who are not there. There's nothing in any system that we've done that has prevented people from doing that. All that has prevented people from getting rid of bad teachers is not properly documenting what's happening in the classroom.
Matt, do you have a different perspective?
Well, first of all, I have to agree with Melissa that Ohio is definitely not California. As a former resident of California, I'm frequently reminded whenever I go outside that Ohio is definitely not California. And they're two very different situations. So in California, for example, teachers are given, or administrators have to make the decision whether or not to give teachers a tenure after 2 years. However, that decision takes place before they even see the second evaluation, so they're making that decision after looking at only one evaluation. So two very different situations. And I think one of the biggest differences is that these conversations, unfortunately, aren't really taking place in California. So I really appreciate Fordham for hosting this event and for inviting both Students First and the Ohio Federation of Teachers to participate. And I really appreciate Melissa and Daryl and Deb at Ohio Federation of Teachers that you truly are always willing to engage in these conversations, because you place the interests of the students first, and you're always looking to look at both sides and to really engage in productive conversations. And unfortunately, I don't think that always takes place in California and in a lot of states, unfortunately. So, the situation in Los Angeles is very different than a lot of the districts here in Ohio. And, one of the most depressing things, if you read the Vergara decision, you look at what's been happening in Los Angeles, is the students who are really losing out, who are not getting a quality education, who do not have an effective educator, are the students who desperately need that in their lives. And you have other court cases going on right now in Los Angeles where, because, and this isn't just teachers, administrators aren't doing their jobs in a lot of the schools in Los Angeles, where they don't even have schedules prepared for some of these students. So you had kids wasting days and weeks of their school year just sitting in the cafeteria because they didn't have a schedule ready for them when they entered school. So when you have situations like that, it's really unfortunate, and when you don't have conversations like this, where people are engaging in how can we really provide the best quality education for students, I think everyone loses out. So I really appreciate the environment that exists here in Ohio, where these conversations are happening and people are looking out for the best interests of students. But I completely agree, two different places, and you have to look carefully at what's going on in those different places.
For the record, though, I do volunteer to lead Fordham's new California office. If called upon to serve, I'd be willing to serve.
San Diego?
That's right. Go ahead,
But
Melissa.
I also want to add in there, and I do also appreciate the relationship that we have with you and the ability to have conversations around this kind of stuff. But the things, the problems that Matt just pointed out in the Los Angeles School District, I want to point out, really have very little to do with whether teachers are being evaluated correctly or not, or even with tenure as far as that goes. We're talking about poor learning conditions inside of school districts. And that's what attracts people to a school district. We have to ask ourselves, if we're having trouble attracting high-quality teachers to a school district, what's happening in that school and what needs to change within that school in order to be able to attract and retain good teachers. And we have to recognize that some school districts are more difficult to teach in than others, and as a result, they might need more or different types of resources. And in a system where teachers feel like their voice is respected, they have some autonomy about what happens in the classroom, or they have some voice about what's happening within that school, and are able to use their professional expertise to be able to guide the direction of the school, you'll keep quality teachers there. It has very little to do with tenure, per se. And I also want to add that, it's not tenure in Ohio, it's a continuing contract. And a continuing contract still doesn't mean that person has a job for life, and that's a misconception that a lot of people have. A continuing contract just means you're guaranteed due process rights. But if an administrator still documents that you're performing poorly, they can still get rid of that teacher. So I think there's a lot of confusion about what a continuing contract is and what that does for a teacher. It does not guarantee a teacher a job for life. It just simply means that teacher has the right to due process, and it means that a district can't get rid of a more experienced teacher simply because they're trying to save money and hire less experienced teachers in the classroom.
So I'm going to dispense with the lesson from law school that says never ask a question that you don't know an answer to. I'm going to go ahead and ask. You mentioned, Melissa, continuing contracts are different, that it is possible to discharge a teacher if they're not doing their job. You just have to document it well. In so many places, a lot of the headlines we see is the costs to do this are $300,000, $400,000, $500,000. In your perception in Ohio, is that accurate? Because that might be possible, but it doesn't sound too appealing to a lot of school districts, I would imagine. So and if it, well, I guess I'll just leave it there. Is that what the costs are like here, or is it? Yeah.
I would be. I don't have the research in front of me that says, how much exactly we're spending on it, so I don't want to pretend like I'm giving an answer that I might not necessarily know the answer to. What I will say is that, again, it's 7 years before you get a continuing contract. So there are lots of opportunities during that 7 years to determine whether a teacher is a person you want in your system or not want in your system. Again, there are processes in place to allow for those conversations to take place and for the union administration to work together to figure out whether this teacher still belongs in the system or not. We can always point to anomalies where there's a certain case somewhere that costs an exorbitant amount of money. That I'm sure that it's happened in Ohio as it has happened in other places. But again, I believe that is an anomaly and not the rule. And that in most places, if a teacher is not doing their job and is properly documented, then you can still get rid of that teacher. I know a lot of times people point to New York and the rubber rooms that they had, et cetera, which are, our national president is from New York. But I also want to point out that the union came to the table in those situations, and they have, over the past couple of years, drastically changed that system to make it easier and less expensive to counsel these teachers out of the profession, to get rid of these teachers. So again, what I encourage is that instead of having laws that place these that eliminate teachers' rights. What we need to do is have conversations about what's the problem in the system. If there is a problem in the system, how do we work together to alleviate that problem so that we're all trying to drive a quality education system rather than placing us on teams or pitting us against each other.
Good. All right, let me ask one more question, then turn it up to you. And if you don't, I'll warn you that if you don't ask questions, then I have more. So, so get a second helping of breakfast. And here's my last question, at least for now. And that is Ohio's teacher evaluation system. It's now up, it's in place, and we have a year's worth of data. Any comments on the first year of data in the Ohio teacher evaluation system? Is it working like you'd expect? Any overall thoughts?
Is it what we expected? Well, it showed 90% of teachers are within the top 2 tiers. So I think that says a lot for the quality of teachers in Ohio. We have a lot of great teachers here in the state of Ohio. I hope it also gives teachers a little bit more confidence in the system. I know whenever a new system is put into place, it makes people uneasy, and I know that a lot of teachers here felt uneasy about this new system. So I hope it gives them a little bit more confidence. And I think, with any evaluation system, there should be constant feedback from, between the teachers and the administrators, and also the administrators and the policymakers and legislators, to continually improve that system. So you had a year with the new system, how did it go? How can we improve the system, both the implementation and the policy of the system? But overall, I hope it gives people a little bit more confidence in the system. I don't know.
No, I would say, am I surprised? No, we already knew that about 90% of our teachers were doing a great job. I think what we have to ask ourselves is, at what expense did we formalize knowing that 90% of the teachers are doing a good job? We've caused a lot of angst, a lot of anxiety. We've driven people out of the profession, all to find out that about 10% of the teachers aren't performing at a high level, another 90% are. So the question is, what are we going to do with the results of this now? I mean, if the intent was to identify 10% of the teachers, then what are we going to do now with those 10% of the teachers? Okay, is there a chance that can we provide them the mentoring and supports that they need to get better, or are they people who need to be out of the profession? But I think we also have to ask, are there ways that we can make this system a little bit less burdensome, so that teachers don't feel like they're spending so much of their time being compliant, so much of their time trying to prove that they're a good teacher? And how can we make it more that development tool that we intended for it to be? How can we make it something that is helpful to teachers rather than something that's cumbersome to teachers? And how do we alleviate the stress that we're putting on because of all the high stakes testing that is being associated with it? And I would maintain that if we would do away with attaching the high stakes test to the teacher evaluation, that we actually might see more quality happen in the evaluation, because teachers would again be able to focus on what they do within the classroom to drive student achievement rather than focusing so much on that end-of-course exam.
All right. So now it's your turn. If not, Melissa did leave an opening for me to ask a follow-up, but so save her. Ask a question.
Yeah, save me, please.
And there is a microphone in the center if anybody wants to. All right. Well, oh, please. If you could go to the mic, that would be great. We are taping this, so you can be a star.
Good morning. My question is a bit of a two-parter. Earlier in the conversation, you described the evaluation system as a system that's kind of trying to identify all of the bad teachers, almost kind of like a a professional Darwinism, kind of shaking out all the bad teachers that can't really survive the evaluation process. And my experience thus far with the OTEST system has been more of a growth model. Good. It's been heavily promoted as a growth model. And even in the trainings for the credentialing, it's promoted as a growth model. So my question is, first of all, how do we take the focus off of the evaluation part and put more focus on the development aspect of the evaluation system? We are talking a lot about how the evaluation can impact scaring away teachers because of how cumbersome it can be, but we're not talking much about structures for development. And the other question I have is about how the high-stakes testing and the student results, a lot of teachers are balking at the use of student results, but I'm kind of with the gentleman on my right. Then what should we use except student achievement? Because that's the purpose of teaching. So what do we do in place of high-stakes testing if we're going to do something that is not going to include student results?
Very, very good questions that I appreciate. First of all, I'm glad that your experience is that the evaluation system has been used as a growth model, because that's very much what it was intended to be originally. And again, we were highly supportive of OTES in helping develop the OTES system. I've said many times that I think that at this point in time, these times call for brave leadership. And we have districts where leaders are saying, don't worry about the test results. Don't worry about the outcomes. We're going to work on this together. We're going to grow together, and everything's going to be okay. And in those districts, things are okay. We have other districts where it's harder for people to say that for whatever reasons, and that there's very much a focus on what the ranking is going to be or what those test results are going to be. And this is actually where a lot of our over-testing is coming from, because we get so focused on progress monitoring and benchmark testing and everything else, and we're taking away from instructional time just so districts can make sure that they're on target to meet those tests. It becomes counterproductive, right? So I think that I don't want to make it sound like I'm opposed to OTES, because I'm not. I just think there needs to be more emphasis on that teacher performance piece. And how do we provide the supports for teachers? How do we allow for collaboration time so that teachers can work together on that growth piece? How do we use the expertise that we have within the school to help each other? But again, oftentimes that takes funding or reallocation of resources or whatever, because it means looking at your schedule. How do you adjust time within your schedule so that teachers have time for those conversations? Or how do you have enough teachers within a district so that you can have some who are dedicated entirely to coaching, but still have enough teachers to cover classrooms? So it takes looking at those kind of pieces in order to really make it a growth model. And again, that varies from district to district based upon the size of the district, the capacity that you have within the district, which again is why I think it is very difficult to have some kind of mandated state system that says you have to do things a certain way. And I'd rather see some recommended frameworks for what should happen within a system and allow that to be adjusted according to individual needs. I do think, as I said earlier, that tests have a place on some point in time. The problem comes in when we try to hold teachers solely responsible for test results. And I think we're still trying to figure out what is a valid way to use test results. And again, I would maintain that when a heavy emphasis is placed on test results, again, it drives what's happening within the district as far as additional testing that occurs, and it can change the nature of what's happening in the classroom. There should be some accountability to test results, but again, the question is it better to place that to place the student growth measures on student learning objectives, which are actually based upon what's happening in your classroom, or to place them on some tests that we haven't really seen, and we don't know what we're trying to teach yet, and we're trying to make high-stakes decisions based upon a system where, like I said, we haven't fully implemented the test yet, we haven't fully implemented Common Core yet. We're telling people we know scores are going to drop because the tests are more difficult and the standards are more rigorous, but yet at the same time we're saying scores are going to drop. We're going to hold teachers accountable for the results on those tests, and we're not ready for that yet. We're simply not ready for that yet. So there needs to be a slowdown. I mean, there needs to be a delay on using these high stakes attached to these state mandated tests, at least until we determine, at least until we have all the resources in place, we've had the professional development in place, we see whether the tests are reliable or not, we've had the opportunity to teach Common Core standards for a while, and then at that point in time, let's have another conversation about, well, are the tests we're using really measuring what we wanted to measure? Are we ready to say that, that these can be used for high stakes? Although, again, I will always question whether they should be used for high stakes or not, but we're not even ready to have that conversation yet about whether to attach high stakes decisions to these or not. And we're forcing the system to be successful way too quickly before we've taken the time to really put all the proper pieces in place.
Matt, anything to add?
I would agree that I think with a lot of new policies, the implementation sometimes can be really rushed, and then people want to change it or throw it out completely before it even has been completely implemented. So Park this year hasn't even been fully implemented, and people already want to get rid of it, right? And so I know that if you're in the classroom and, you know, and last year there was a bill to repeal, you know, the Common Core standards. So if you're in the classroom and you spent years, you know, getting ready for these new standards, this new test, and then all of a sudden before you can even give the new test or, you know, deliver the first lesson on these new standards and people are already talking about getting rid of them, I understand that's really, really frustrating. And I also think, you know, with the measures that are included in the evaluation, you can also look at how to improve those existing measures. So if you look at classroom observations, I know that, you know, some teachers might say, well, I'm not really comfortable with my school principal only doing my observations because I don't think he's really effective at it, or, you know, we don't have the best relationship. So if you have, you know, multiple people doing those observations and those observations take place, you know, on different days and are for different lengths of time, I think that helps. Also, the focus should be on, you know, student growth, not student achievement, and I think sometimes that's left out of the conversation. So we know that teachers, you know, teach students that come in at all different places, right? So the focus shouldn't be on what are the test scores at the end of the day. It's, you know, where did they start and how much did they grow, right? And really, you know, teachers are amazing because they're able to help those students grow throughout the year, and it's critical that every student has an effective teacher. And we know that, you know, the students who come in at the lowest levels are the ones that are, you know, most in need of that effective teacher. So it's critical to provide the supports to those teachers to help those students grow.
And I just want to add a couple more things here. You know, we all took final exams when we were in school. I mean, exams aren't new. We all took final exams. But I don't ever remember when I was growing up anyone saying that the teacher was going to be held responsible for whether I studied or not for that final exam, okay? So that's what we have to ask ourselves about high stakes attached to tests. How much is the teacher responsible for how a student performs on a test, and how much is a student responsibility or a parent responsibility for how students perform on that test? And that's why, you know, you have to look, you know, they say use 3 years of data. You can look at trends on do your students always perform poorly or does it fluctuate? But again, there's not a whole lot of reliability in the system right now. The other point the other comment I want to make is that I found it very interesting last week that Governor Kasich in his State of the State address, when he was talking about charters, said, you know, we got to be careful not to judge charters based upon their performance on a test. We have to take into account what students they're teaching and understand that because of the students that they're teaching, their results might come back more poorly. Well, duh, I mean, that's what, that's what we've been saying about public schools for years. And at the same time he's saying this, we're trying to hold teachers accountable for the test results of every single student that comes through the system without taking into account the background that those children came from, whether they have supports at home or don't have supports at home, whether they can see the whiteboard or not see the whiteboard, whether they're hungry or they come to school with a full belly. There are a whole lot of outside factors that we have to take into consideration when we're determining what's happening with this child's education. And so to place too much emphasis on that test at the end of the year, to hold the teacher solely responsible for what happens on that test at the end of the year, ignores all those other outside factors.
So I think it's important to always emphasize that teacher quality is the most important in-school factor in student achievement. And there are so many different things that are going on in students' lives that affect whether or not they can, how well they're able to receive what the teacher's doing in the classroom. And I think oftentimes when we talk about teacher effectiveness and looking at those different factors, we're often thinking of, okay, the school in this part of the town compared to a school on a different side of town, right? And it's not fair for teachers at those different schools to be compared against each other, or But I also think about when you're a teacher, and let's say there are 5 teachers teaching 4th grade in your school, right? And you've all been teaching 4th grade for 5 years. And the principal, and every year those students are randomly assigned, and I know in the real world oftentimes there are special requests and things like that. But every year they're randomly assigned to those 5 teachers all teaching at the same school. Any principal can look at that and say, like, wow, it's amazing. Like, every year this one teacher, Mrs. Smith, is able to really help these students grow. And I hear that, I both see that in my classroom observations, the test scores, and I also hear that from the 5th grade teachers, right? And then you also see that, maybe Mr. Smith in the same grade, like, consistently over those 5 years, has really struggled to help that same random assignment of students to grow. I see that in the classroom observations. I hear that from the parents. I see that in the test scores. I hear that from the 5th grade teachers loud and clear. So, all these things are going on in the students' lives, and it's really important to address those. But I also feel like those students desperately need an effective teacher in the classroom. And the parents see that, the principal sees that. So when you look at, the same group of students, like, randomly assigned across those 5 teachers, and year after year you see the same things. And, I used to be a teacher, so I know that, like, one of the biggest things I was always worried about is, like, okay, next year when the teacher gets to my students, like, are they gonna feel like I did a good job? Like, are my students gonna walk into that classroom feeling like they're well prepared? Or are they gonna feel like, man, I wish, Mr. Verber had taught this or that? And so that's what I think about, like, you always have to worry about all those different things that are going on in the students' lives and take those into account. But, in so many schools you see that, where the students are randomly assigned, and year after year, one teacher's, a rock star, or 4 teachers are rock stars, and then there's that one teacher that's struggling. And it really breaks my heart to see when a student doesn't have an effective teacher and goes on to the next year, it's really sad, because then that student is really struggling. And if that student doesn't have an effective teacher that year, what often happens is, with 2 years of an ineffective teacher, that student can't really catch up, especially if they don't have the support at home, like a private tutor or a parent that can help them through it. So you're looking at the student who's most vulnerable to begin with, and is just not given the support they need at the school level. So it's critical to always think about those outside factors, but when we're looking at one school and multiple teachers teaching the same random assignment students, it's important to think about that.
Additional questions? Please.
Hi. My question's about SLOs. You mentioned that earlier, and from a curriculum standpoint, which is what I do, I feel like the SLO is really the most useful part of what we're doing, and around the conversations with teachers, I really feel that teachers feel that way too. Now, the implementation of it maybe has varied, but I guess my question is, that's the way we know whether we're enacting the curriculum. The standards are fine and all that, and the assessments, standardized assessments, but I look at the SLO as the way we know if it's happening in the classroom. And I guess I'm wondering, where do you think that's going? What are other states doing better than us? And then my third little question is, what can districts do? What do we have control of to where we can make that a more useful tool? I think we have some ideas. I think we're going in the right direction with SLOs, but in the district I work in, which is Olentangy schools. But I'm worried, once again, we're doing all this work, and then, is that going to go away also? So any thoughts on that?
I will say one of the most disappointing things that came out of Dr. Ross's testing report was this mention of eliminating SLOs in favor of shared attribution. I absolutely agree with you that SLOs are more indicative of what we're doing in the classroom and whether we're hitting the mark with our students or not. And there are, without question, problems in the system, inconsistencies in how they have been developed from district to district to district. But I absolutely believe that we need to invest more time, energy, and resources into how we develop that SLO system, figure out how to fix those inconsistencies and to put together a system that supports SLOs because they really are the true measure of what's happening in the classroom. Where, as I said, shared attribution flies in the face of everything that the state has said that they wanted to do with evaluations. It certainly doesn't identify who your poor performing teachers are, nor does it identify who your top performing teachers are. It actually, kind of pulls everybody to the middle. And it's an easy solution. We'll have members who say they would prefer to do shared attribution over SLOs because it's a quick, easy fix. And if you're in a district where scores are high, then absolutely, let's share those scores across the system and not worry about the SLOs. But if we're really looking at how do we put some quality into the system, and how do we look at what's happening in each classroom, and how do we drive improvement within each classroom, and we need a student growth measure as part of the evaluation, then SLOs are really a truer measure of what happens there. I don't know the answer to your second part of the system. I'm actually we're starting to do some research ourselves into how SLOs are done in other places so that we can make recommendations for what a quality SLO system looks like. I just don't think that we should dump it so readily in favor of something that, NEA's already filed a lawsuit in Tennessee over shared attribution because it's such an unfair measure of what a teacher is doing in the classroom.
Matt, anything to add?
So I would just repeat what I said earlier, that all teachers are using student learning objectives. It's just, whether we have the, student learning objectives included in the evaluation and we're doing them in a formal way. And I think when you're using student learning objectives in evaluation, there's a trade-off between standardization and customization. And I think possibly in Ohio, there's been, that balance has been tilted more towards standardization. So rather than being part of a teacher's curriculum, I think SLOs for some teachers has been seen as an additional layer of testing that is unnecessary, and that it's been more of an administrative burden than necessary. So possibly, tilting, the balance more towards customization could help in that. So I think that's possibly, the direction to go. And as I said earlier, we share some concerns about shared attribution. So if you think about the example I gave earlier with, 5 fourth grade teachers, if you think about shared attribution using that example, it's not going to do anything to help the situation, right? Because as Melissa was saying, it's just going to draw everyone to the middle. So if you look at shared attribution, it's just going to show that all those teachers are doing fine. It's not going to show that, Mr. Smith really needs additional support and help and to improve his instruction.
And again, one of the disappointing conversations or phrases that I've heard repeated a few times from top level people and policymakers in the state is basically that we can't trust teachers to do SLOs because they won't be hard enough on themselves. And to me, that is just really, really disappointing to hear that from some top policymakers in the state. Because the truth of the matter is, when we look across the system, when we go into our locals and talk with teachers about SLOs, we have found that most teachers have actually been harder on themselves than what they would have been if someone else had been writing an SLO for them. The teachers who are really top quality teachers are looking at how can they improve, how can they drive achievement, drive quality in their classrooms, and they really took this seriously and tried to set high standards for themselves. And again, we need to be including those teachers' voices in how we make SLOs quality. And using the expertise of these people in developing this system. So again, it seems like we focus a lot of times on eliminating the teacher voice in these decisions because we don't trust teachers to make those kind of decisions. And I shouldn't say we, because it's certainly not we doing that. But it seems like some policymakers often eliminate the teacher's voice because they don't trust teachers to make these kind of decisions. But the truth of the matter is, the teachers are the ones who are in the classroom living this and doing this. And we need to include their voices in how we make this system work.
All right, we have time for one more question, if anybody. Michael?
Hi, Matt Dotson with the
Oh,
Ohio
sorry.
Education Association. It's all right. The Ohio teacher evaluation system we're talking about today does not apply to charter schools unless the charter school is participating in the Race to the Top grant. Can you both comment on that distinction?
Yeah, so this is something that's been discussed a lot recently. So I think an important thing to keep in mind with charter schools is there's, they're given additional flexibility in exchange for additional autonomy. So a lot of laws apply to charter schools that don't apply to traditional public schools. So, charter schools can be shut down if their test scores aren't high enough, whereas, traditional public schools don't have that same closure mechanism. So I think, it's important to maintain, a high level of flexibility for charter schools while there's also a high level of autonomy. And I know that there's a lot of work to do in terms of, improving charter accountability here in Ohio. But I think it's also important throughout that conversation of improving charter accountability that we preserve some flexibility for charter schools.
And I would just say that, flexibility was intended to allow for innovation to happen. But if you're talking about teacher evaluations, if Ohio is saying that OTES is the system for determining whether they're determining teacher quality, and you want to ensure teacher quality across the whole education system, then that same quality measure should apply to all schools. We shouldn't have flexibility around teacher quality.
And the only thing I would add is it may go down to people's views toward teacher evaluation systems. If your view is growth and development, then you could make a strong argument that the law should apply to charter schools. If your ability is to make sure that ineffective teachers can be exited from the classrooms, charter schools already have that flexibility. They're able to do that on a year-to-year basis. And I think that may be where sort of the argument breaks down and why we haven't reached sort of a conclusion on whether or not it should apply. All right. Well,
Can I just make one more comment about that? I'm sorry.
Please.
But again, I want to go back to the original concept of charter schools, but that they would be they would be incubators of innovation to try to find breakthroughs that show what works across the system, that could then be scaled across the entire education system. So if we're giving flexibility to charters and then holding them accountable to coming back and saying, okay, this innovation works, how are we going to spread this? And that's one question. So if we're saying, okay, this XYZ charter school is not doing OTES, but they're using this really incredible evaluation system that we need to figure out how to get into other schools. That's one question. But it appears like the flexibility is not for the sake of innovation. The flexibility is just another way for some people to get off the hook.
All right. No. we come back for part 2. Charter schools. Thank you all for coming this morning. As I mentioned at the beginning, stay tuned for more speaker series events, issues on our agenda. This is my shameless plug. School closures, Ed Choice vouchers, student achievement in that program, potentially deregulation, and open enrollment. So we hope to see you all again. Thank you for coming. And if you're not doing anything between 10 and 11, my boss, Mike Petrilli, is on All Sides with Ann Fisher, where they're talking about the growing opt-out movement in Ohio and around the country. So that should be good radio listening if you're driving back to the office. So anyway, have a great afternoon, day, and thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much.